Media is everything in this day and age. Whether it be a movie, show, game, album, news thread, video, photograph, or podcast, media is everywhere. Because of this, media is bound to be lost to time in some way or another. Perhaps its irrelevance tossed it to the wayside to never be thought about again. Or maybe the product was destroyed, whether it be an accident or on purpose. The point being that there is so much media circulating within every walking moment that a good portion of media will likely be lost no matter what precautions taken. This in turn leads to the frustrating yet fascinating world that is lost media, a phenomenon dedicated to finding old forgotten pop culture relics of days past. Of course, one of the most enticing forms of media in this day and age is the interactive art form of video games. And while the internet may be skilled in preserving many gaming related news and data, the act of finding and preserving the games themselves have proven to be an incredibly difficult task, as the majority of lost games are either locked behind corporate bars or stored away in storage, collecting dust while the outside world moves on. But while lost media is a fine subject on its own, we'd like to expand this video to not just be restricted to lost media. Rather, we'd like to focus our attention on video games that will never see the light of day, whether they are lost or not. My name is Purple, and joining me today is Landen, and today we're here to explore 10 horror games you will never be able to play.
During the early 90s, video games were getting into the habit of evolving genre. Vast technological leaps were allowing games of any variety to flourish, and one such genre was the newly appreciated horror genre. Though initially starting in 1982 with the release of Haunted House for the Atari 2600, horror would begin new in a completely different space with the advent of 3D graphics. In 1992, a game by the name of Alone in the Dark would release to the masses, setting the stage for truly terrifying experiences to exist, and to many, that first truly terrifying experience was 1996's Resident Evil. Resident Evil, alongside many other notable entries, cemented the horror genre within video games, and to this day, horror is still one of the gaming's most popular genres. Because of that, the horror genre has its fair share of lost games, and today, we'll make note of these games, their status, and comment on how they could have fared in the wide world of gaming. And what better way to start than with the catalyst of the genre. Following the critical success that was 1996's Resident Evil, Capcom had high expectations to live up to. Only 1 month after the original game was finished, development on a Resident Evil follow-up would begin. However, 2 months before their new game was set to release, some members of the team grew concerned that the game was straying too far from its horror roots. Because of this, game producers Shinji Mikami and Hideki Kamiya would conclude that the game would need to be overhauled. And so, the sequel to Resident Evil would restart production and inevitably turn into the game we all know and love, 1998's Resident Evil 2, aka the best. Despite Capcom hitting the reset button, all was not lost, for the initial prototype of Resident Evil 2 still exists, albeit in an unfinished state. This prototype would go on to be known as Resident Evil 1.5. a half step between the original and its chilling sequel. To put into perspective how different this game would end up becoming, allow me to share some of the stark differences between 1.5 and 2. For one, the police station in 1.5 had a much more modern and contemporary look. This is in stark contrast to the final game, where we would come to understand that the police station in Resident Evil 2 used to be an art museum, which conveniently explains the eccentric puzzles the player character would have to solve. The character of Leon Kennedy, who was initially named Grant Bittman, originated from 1.5, and is largely the same character we see in the finished game. However, instead of finding his way into the chaotic ruin that is Raccoon City after Outbreak, he's actually first seen defending the police station alongside Marvin Branagh, who apparently had a much larger role in comparison to the finished project. One of the most notable differences within 1.5 is through the character of Elza Walker, a motorcyclist who would soon be enrolled at Raccoon University. Elza was the original female character in Resident Evil 2, and sports many similarities to Claire Redfield. Elza's story is also very similar to Claire's path, with a recognizable cast of characters that fade in and out of her story. During the reproduction of Resident Evil 2, Elza would then become Claire Redfield. Those are only a few of the many differences between Resident Evil 1.5 and 2, and despite RE2 being regarded as one of the best in the series, fans were left wondering, what happened to the original version of Resident Evil 2? This question would soon plague many fan forums, drawing theorists, collectors, and liars to web pages like a swarm of bugs. Now, the recovery of Resident Evil 1.5 is a very long and convoluted tale that involves large sums of money, betrayal, and even death. The story of 1.5 demands its own video, which numerous people on this platform have done, so because of that, we'll only explain the current status of the lost prototype with a brief history. For years, the status of RE 1.5 was lost to the public, with screenshots and leaked videos being the only thing of sustenance for the fandom. This all culminates in the year of 2013, when we find the RE 1.5 community in a frustrating position. After years of infighting combined with the refusal of collectors to release the sacred treasure that is RE 1.5, the fandom was all but defeated. But on one strange July day, an eBay auction popped up, containing a collection of console gaming relics, including a PS2 test kit, some other obscure old games, and what seemed to be a random disc copy of Resident Evil 1.5. This copy was obtained for $2,025 and was shortly made public for the RE fandom to dissect. Unfortunately, this copy was an older build of the game before it was cancelled, meaning that large portions of the 80% 1.5 build are still missing to this day. But this hasn't stopped dedicated fans who have made an effort to completely restore and even finish the elusive RE 1.5. In fact, you can play a modded recreation of RE 1.5 right now if you take the time to get the game up and running. And despite large portions of the game being available to the public, the original 80% build of RE 1.5 is still lost to the public and is likely idle in Capcom's storage room, never to see the light of day again.
Those who know anything about the development of video games know that a game will constantly change throughout its creation. Most games you love and are familiar with possibly played, looked, and felt entirely different months before their release. And this is especially true when it comes to older video games. As we saw with Resident Evil 1.5, the entire game was shaken up and put back together again in only 1 year. This trend would persist throughout Capcom following Resident Evil's subsequent releases. When it came to gaming's most revered survival horror action title, Resident Evil 4, a similar story would play out. After the initial idea of RE4 was reworked into Capcom's newfound franchise, Devil May Cry, 3 more versions of RE4 would come to fruition. Version 1 was the castle version, which saw Leon infiltrate Umbrella HQ, which was a haunted castle sprawling with trepidation. This version was canned due to the technical limitations at the time, as one of the main enemies that were to be seen throughout the game was this mass of black fog. This black fog was difficult to get right, so the team at Capcom moved on. All was not lost though, as the idea was handed over to another subsection of Capcom that would inevitably turn the idea into a little game we know as Haunting Ground. The next version is commonly known as the hallucination version, which was an attempt that tried introducing more psychological horror elements. This version would have Leon switch between 2 planes of existence, one being the normal world and the other being a mystical hallucinogenic world filled with fear. Once again, technical limitations of the time barred the game from its creation, so another version was made. The last version of RE4 would come to be known as the zombie version, which allegedly held the same premise as the castle iteration of the game, but this time with new but familiar enemies, that being the undead. This version introduces creatures called the Dabamen, who are essentially just a first draft version of the Ganados seen within the final game. This zombie version of the game was seen by staff members as a return to the franchise's standard formula, which producer Shinji Mikami had become highly critical of due to the repetition of the franchise. Little information is known about the intended setting of this game, as no concept art is known to have been made, but it is speculated that the setting wasn't so different from the base game. Ultimately, soon after the project began, Mikami took over directional duties, ending the zombie era of this project. We can only assume from here that the version of Resident Evil 4 we all know and love today would finalize and come to fruition. While that is an interesting story and all, we can't help but wonder, what happened to these previous versions of Resident Evil 4? We know that the first 2 iterations of the game would turn into 2 separate games of their own, that being Devil May Cry and Haunting Ground. But what happened to the other projects after that? Well, of course, since it's a big Japanese video game company, we'll most likely never know. But if we take a closer look at the base RE4 that released in 2005, we can find many similarities to the previous versions we were just discussing, not only drawing parallels with the Dabamen and Ganados, but also the castle, Leon's hallucinations, and the ties to Umbrella Corp. While the other versions of RE4 would inevitably find their way into the survival horror classic, one question remains. What happened to the demoed versions of RE 3.5? We saw numerous gameplay demos of the game in its various iterations, and according to GamePro, it was confirmed that approximately 50% of the hallucination version was finished by January of 2004, before the project was restarted. So where could they be? From what we can gather, there are possibly numerous unfinished builds of RE4 somewhere within Capcom, and from the looks of it, Capcom seems to have learned their lesson, as there have been no reported leaked demos of RE 3.5. So it is speculated that RE 3.5 is likely within the halls of Capcom's offices, either stored away on a GameCube dev kit or barred away on a random stray server. In short, RE 3.5 will likely never be leaked to the public unless Capcom were either hacked, looted, or dissipated. But in modern day, this most likely will never happen for a very long time, as long as the company is the biggest and best it has ever been. All is not lost though, as passionate fans of the franchise have been developing a fan-made version of RE 3.5. While not official, the game uses assets from other titles to attempt to replicate the previous versions of RE4 we discussed. But alas, it is a fan-made game that tries to fill in the blanks when the truth is, RE 3.5 will likely never see the light of day again.
Modern gamers with an eye for horror are bound to have noticed the peculiar involvement of genius Mexican filmmaker Guillermo del Toro in the games industry. Though many might know of del Toro as Deadman and Kojima's 2020 avant-garde hit Death Stranding, it might behoove you to know this wasn't the first time the two had actually worked together on a project. In August of 2014, Konami, in association with Kojima and del Toro, made a demo that shook the entire internet to its core. I, of course, am talking about PT and the cancelled Silent Hills project. But who am I kidding? If you're watching this video, you are bound to know the story of this game at this point, so instead of focusing on PT and Silent Hills, you might be interested in knowing that this wasn't the first time del Toro had worked on a horror video game, and rather than partnering with industry creative Hideo Kojima, he had instead been working with the publisher THQ as well as the studio Volition. Yes, the Saints Row team. Now allow me to take you back to 2010. Before the VGAs we knew today, there were the Spike Video Game Awards. That is so comically inferior to the showcases we see today, as the industry was still being drastically misunderstood at the time. But that is besides the point. After many interviews and announcements, game enthusiasts were treated to a 30-second teaser trailer of a game entitled Insane. For years, del Toro had been in the process of getting a game started up, noting that he tried before with a project called Sundown, which supposedly was eerily similar to Valve's Left 4 Dead, which the filmmaker admits he adores and is addicted to, stating that he considers the zombie shooter a family game. How sweet. Despite the trailer being the only offering to game players at the time, it was made pretty clear what this game was trying to accomplish. Months before the game was officially announced, del Toro had been asked by MTV about the video game he had allegedly been working on with THQ. Despite the trailer being the only offering to game players at this time, it was made pretty clear what the game was trying to accomplish. Months before the video game was even announced, del Toro had been asked by MTV about the video game he had allegedly been working on with THQ. The filmmaker had this to say.
It's horror, but it's a very different type of horror game. It's not survival horror, it's a truly strange, geeky mix. It's a Lovecraftian thing. Let's leave it at that.
Further interviews and discussions would arise, and more quotes from del Toro would help shape the idea of this game to the public.
With this new series of video games, I wanted to take players to a place they had never seen before, where every single action makes them question their own senses and morality and reality. THQ and Volition are equally excited to make this vision of a completely new universe into a reality.
So, Insane was to be a Lovecraftian role-playing horror trilogy developed by Volition with Guillermo del Toro as the creative lead. A very exciting idea, but it never happened. During this time, THQ was in a very rough patch, as the company had made a series of questionable decisions and was under a crippling debt. Because THQ is unsustainable, the first entry in the Insane trilogy was cancelled, and the publisher would file for bankruptcy months later. All was not lost, however, as the rights for Insane were handed over to del Toro himself, that way he could use his ideas for any future projects. But seeing as how the next horror game he worked on was also cancelled, it's likely his ideas for a horror trilogy were put to the wayside, most likely to not be used for a very long time, if ever. In the modern day, it can be inferred that Insane will most likely not see the light of day in video game form. Del Toro being handed over the IP for Insane insinuated that he may have had intentions to find a new developer and publisher for his game series, but alas, we've seen nothing. It's likely many of the ideas behind Insane could have been seen in Silent Hills, but as you know, we never saw that game come to life either. To put a cherry on top of the matter, in December of 2021, del Toro was featured as a guest on the Happy Sad Confused podcast, where he talks about his appearance during the 2021 Game Awards. you see, I'm tying it all back here now. At the Game Awards, Del Toro presented the award for Best Art Direction, but before doing so, the filmmaker made an offset comment about his love for the art direction seen within the Silent Hill franchise.
You know, one franchise I love the art direction in, Silent Hill. I hope we get a new one of those.
Stating that he hopes to see a new entry somewhere down the line, wish granted. Anyways, on this podcast, Del Toro admits that he's done working on games, as he sees himself to be an albatross of video gaming. His comment over Silent Hill was to, quote, tickle the ribs of Konami because I don't understand. That was so perfect. What we were going to do was so enthralling. It's disappointing that Del Toro's Insane never came into fruition, but thanks to the community on Unseen64, we can find concept art and models of the monsters that were to be seen within the Eldritch horror game. Many models are very obviously Del Toro designed, with many fascinating details seen within. As to how the monsters were to be implemented in the game is purely speculatory, but ultimately just not worth our time, as the concept of Insane will most likely never touch the gaming world again. This in turn leaves us with one remaining question: what happened to the remnants of this game? Concerning how far along in development Insane was, Del Toro said at the time of cancellation at THQ, the game was in, quote, good shape. The world, the creatures, the levels, and the story were all in place. It's likely the remnants of Insane were either shelved over at the offices of Volition, or just transferred to Del Toro for a personal keepsake. Ultimately, we will never know unless the project is revived for whatever reason, but as I said before, it's not likely. And so ends the journey of Del Toro's Insane.
One of the PlayStation 3's most notorious titles was the interactive action thriller Heavy Rain, a game known for its weird writing, janky graphics, and interactive butterfly effect storytelling. This game was notable for many reasons, the main being that this game essentially popularized the interactive story adventure game on console. But you might be surprised to find that a game of the same breadth was to be made before Heavy Rain, a game planned for the PS2 as well as the PC. This game was to be Legions of Fear, an interactive point-and-click adventure horror game. But in order to explain what Legions of Fear is, allow me to set the stage. In 2002, a French gaming studio named Delphine Software International was flailing about for the attention of potential publishers. So they made a tech demo by the name of La Toilette du Diable. I hope I said that right. I probably didn't, but anyways, which in English translate to Devil Cannabis. This point-and-click horror demo took place during World War I and follows a lady by the name of Helena. Helena's story begins when she finds herself lost, entering a mysterious mansion by the name of Wild Castle Manor. Inside the mansion, she discovers that the deceased homeowner, Anton Wildcastle, has anticipated Helena's arrival and promised her soul to his masters. The game was split into two different gameplay styles. While the game was a point-and-click adventure, action sequences saw the player take direct control over Helena, fighting any enemies that would stand in her way. When indoors, Helena could find clues, doing so by interacting with the environments using a mouse, or in this case of the PS2 version, the face buttons. This demo was created to sell the idea behind Legions of Fear to developers, one of which was interested, that being the big tech giant Sony. The Japanese company found themselves interested in the project but stated that they would only bite if Delphine finished one of their projects first, Motor Racer Traffic. Unfortunately for all parties involved, Delphine Software went bankrupt and Motor Racer Traffic was never finished, thus leaving Legions of Fear to be nothing but yet another dead dream. While the official game itself is lost to time, lead animator of the project, Thierry Levestre, has since posted videos of the game in action, demonstrating the primitive, yet impressive mocap tech of the time. As to where the game itself is, we don't know. But what we do know is that you'll most likely never get the chance to play this eclectic horror game.
The Sega Dreamcast was a console that was plagued from the very beginning. In an effort to catch up with the two big competitors, that being Sony and Nintendo, the Dreamcast was to be Sega's foothold in the industry, proving that they also had an array of high-quality 3D games. Unbeknownst to the console manufacturer, however, the Dreamcast was comically easy to pirate games from, with it being as simple as just burning a game onto a CD and letting it play. But that's besides the point. And despite the Dreamcast's numerous failures, there were no shortage of good games on the console. And there's especially no shortage of horror games on the console, one of which never saw the light of day: Agartha, a cancelled horror adventure title that was planned by French software house No Cliché, and was helmed by the director who created the granddaddy of survival horror, that being 1992's Alone in the Dark. Development began in 2000, and the story synopsis of the game is as follows. During the winter of 1929, in a Romanian village that was partially destroyed by a landslide that occurred during the mysterious earthquake, a subterranean city exists called Agartha. This is where evil is being kept prisoner and is desperate to escape. Kirk, the human hero, will encounter a series of characters from the villages: the living dead, fanatics from an evil sect, monsters, demons, soldier monks, priests, and the sentinel who is the ultimate personification of evil. As Kirk, you can decide to save many innocent people as possible, or to trigger the arrival of chaos on Earth. As Kirk, morals waver between good and evil. This ambiguity changes the aim of the adventure and the narration of the story. Agartha was an interesting concept from the start, set to feature similar graphics and presentations akin to the likes of D2, Silent Hill, and most obviously Alone in the Dark. Players had to explore the snowed mountains and villages, resolving puzzles and fighting against monsters/demons that live there, all while balancing a BioWare-like morality system of good versus evil. So Agartha was to be Frederic Renault's return to survival horror, and from what we can see, the concept, gameplay, and overall aesthetic looked very enticing. Well, the information I bestowed to you at the very beginning of the segment wasn't useless, because it would be the downfall of the Sega Dreamcast that led to the game being cancelled. The Dreamcast was discontinued in 2001, leaving the horror adventure title Agartha to be left alone in the dark for years to come. Nothing was heard from Agartha in the years to follow. That is, until a post was made in 2008 on the website Unseen64. There, what little information we had on Agartha was shared. Surprisingly, however, in the years to come, one by one, old developers of the projects would end up sharing vital tidbits of information, as well as memories working on the game that led to a greater understanding of what Agartha was to become. Today, there's a whole host of information regarding this game. Everything from the concept art and writings to a partially found build of the game that is accessible to you right at this very instant. So I guess we lied, because in all reality, you kind of can play this horror game, albeit in an unfinished state.
Speaking of PT and Silent Hills, we'd be remiss to not mention another Silent Hill related project that would also unfortunately not release to the public, or at least in its original form. After 2002, once the Silent Hill IP was handed off to Western developers, one of the first games to reach the market was 2007's Silent Hill Origins. Origins would be created by British company Climax Studios, and found itself to be a formidable entry into the Silent Hill franchise. While Origins is not as highly regarded as the original games, it's still a worthy entry that piqued the interest of horror fanatics in 2007. Following Origins, in 2009, another Silent Hill entry was released by Climax Studios, Silent Hill Shattered Memories, a reimagining of the first Silent Hill game. But let us take a step back. Before Shattered Memories became the game it is known for today, the developers at Climax had a very different idea for a new Silent Hill entry, one that would place the player into their own personal purgatory, to truly embody the meaning of psychological horror. This idea would come to be known as Silent Hill Cold Heart, a game that would have followed the character of Jessica Chambers, an emotionally vulnerable college student plagued by horrific nightmares. Being unable to sleep, circumstances lead to Jessica leaving her college town and going on a road trip to go back to visit her parents. On the way back, Jessica becomes caught in a blizzard and begins to follow an ambulance that leads her into the mystical town of Silent Hill. This is where the game would begin, with Jessica stranded and needing somewhere to stay the evening. She explores the town, but now her nightmares, your nightmares, start to become real. Silent Hill Cold Heart is very interesting and notable for many different reasons. For one, the game would have been the first truly different Silent Hill game, altering the fundamentals of the gameplay to have a very distinct style. One of the most notable gameplay changes is the complex character building system, where an in-depth psychological profile would be built from the player's experiences in the game. This psychological profile would go on to influence later events within the game, altering story events, dialogue, sound cues, monsters, and even the camera's field of view. Another notable aspect of the game would have been the utilization of the Wii mode, which would have used its gyroscope motion controls to solve puzzles, analyze objects, and even point, nod, and shake the character's head. Ambitious is the word I would associate with Silent Hill Cold Heart, as not only would the game have delved into intricate character building, but the game was also set to show off the power of the Wii. Graphical fidelity would have been a major focus for the team at Climax because they wanted to show what the Wii could truly do in terms of graphics. On top of that, it is said that load times were not noticeable in the game at all. As to how they would have gone about this is beyond me. Many niche and odd features would have also been included to up the ante in terms of personal fear and torment. For one, this game would have underlined the survival in survival horror, as not only would you have to fend off the harsh cold climate of Silent Hill, but you would also have to eat, drink, and manage storage. Secondly, a breath of the wild style Mii integration system would have also apparently made it into the game. With Mii integration, the devs at Climax wanted to use certain aspects of the user created Mii, such as their hair color, and project them onto the main characters in the game. Lastly, by connecting to the internet, the random stray television sets seen within Silent Hill would have reported real-world news and weather from your area. So, what happened? How did this ambitious, fresh new take on the Silent Hill series get bastardized into a retelling of the original game? Well, it's important to note that Cold Heart was just a pitch towards Konami and not an actual game that was in production. What furthers the idea that the game was actually being made, however, is seen within the Silent Hill Cold Heart pitch document, a series of pages that was given to the fans by Climax. It's theorized that while the pitch was never picked up, in the doc, a notably in-depth walkthrough for a level within the game called The Lake suggests that a build for this level could have existed, though it is unlikely to ever resurface. From the looks of it, it seems that Climax overestimated the technology of the Wii, proposing unrealistic mechanics that the hardware, or granted the dev team, was simply not up to realizing. While Cold Heart in this form never came to fruition, the game was ultimately released as Silent Hill Shattered Memories, with a few aspects borrowed from the rejected pitch.
The PlayStation 3 is home to some of the best, most influential video games ever put to disc. During the late aughts, gaming was hitting its stride, and after stumbling for a good while during the launch of the PS3, it was made clear that Sony had now finally found their path in the games industry. Once SIE buckled down on delivering high-quality, expensive AAA releases, it was time to find suitable talent to help shepherd their new approach. And who else to approach than none other than Masahiro Ito, art director of the Silent Hill franchise. In 2016, on the blog site Silent Hill Paradise, an interview was landed with Masahiro Ito. Here, Ito is asked a series of questions, one of which elicited a very interesting answer. Out of all the games that you've worked on, which game stands out most for you, and why?
It is a game one I have worked on in Sony Computer Entertainment from 2008 to 2010, but was not released. It's a Russian retro sci-fi horror action game.
Unfortunately, there's not a lot to go off from here. No studio, no story, no visuals of the game itself. But we do have one thing. A year later, in March of 2017, Ito revealed what seemed to be a piece of concept art relating to this mysterious horror project. The image in question reveals a steampunkish, Bioshock-like figure cloaked in cloth and iron. The image is very industrial, very dark, and very, very cool. I mean, classic Ito doing his thing when it comes to beautifully haunting pieces of art. The tweet was deleted shortly after, most likely because Ito possibly breached an NDA he signed with Sony, even though the project had already been long cancelled at this point. Eagle-eyed fans of Ito's work, however, noticed many peculiar similarities when it came to this piece of art, finding that it bore many striking similarities to other paintings on Ito's website. Now, keep in mind, it is not confirmed that this is official artwork from the game, but reason would lead us to believe it to be true. Take this with a grain of salt. Concept art for this Russian horror project can be found dating all the way back to 2006, where we find ourselves with more striking pieces of art. A creepy doctor-like character, a heavy-set, disfigured beast of a humanoid, an abstract mask on a mysterious character, a gas mask wanderer with a rifle, futuristic militarized soldiers, and many more creepy, industrial-looking concepts from a game that could have been. As I said before, not much else is known about this project, and there is still many mysteries surrounding Ito's involvement with Sony on this project, so let's speculate. If you're an avid horror game fan, you should know by now that this generation specifically wasn't the best in terms of horror. I have a video covering the topic, but in short, action-based bombastic set pieces infiltrated the horror genre, leaving only a select few games from this era to be true horror games worthy of play. Perhaps Sony was set to follow this trend with this game. Pandering to the more action side of things, Ito may have wanted to wallow in the more horror side. This possible discrepancy may have led to the project falling through, but I mean, this is pure speculation. Of course, who knows what could have happened. So where is this project today? Did Masahiro Ito utilize any bit of his art for future projects? Well, Yes, actually it seems so. There's a multimedia project here on the internet called Acid Buffer Zone, from the mind of Masahiro Ito himself. From what I can see, this project seems to be kind of all over the place, and ultimately resulted in a series of models, figures, and artworks that correlate to the story of Acid Buffer Zone. Speaking of story, there's a section on the website that details what the story behind Acid Buffer Zone is. Now, the translation on this website is not very good, so bear with me here. From what I can see, Acid Buffer Zone is a post-apocalyptic story set after the events of a major catastrophe caused by a group simply named Heiki, or H-E-K-I. The crash was triggered by a high-intensity proton accelerator facility located under the Tokyo area. The story's protagonist, Alexandra B, was born during the period named A War Before. She is a part of an elite combat-enhanced artificial subhuman soldier group called Angel. From there, it is left ambiguous as to what her mission is or what the point of the story is trying to get across. Now, was Acid Buffer Zone the game Sony was trying to get off the ground? We don't know, but it was likely some altered variant of the concept. But for whatever reason, the project never came into fruition. He'll likely reuse many of his ideas for the game on this project. Now, is it likely that we'll ever see this game again? No, not in the slightest. But what could be likely is an Acid Buffer Zone video game created from another studio and published by another entity. But ultimately, this Russian sci-fi project will only forever be remembered as just a series of artworks from a very talented artist.
If you were into the indie horror scene during the late aughts, chances are you might have heard of a peculiar series of mini horror games entitled Hotel 626, as well as its sister game, Asylum 626. These were very strange, experimental, internet-centric horror games that only allowed you to access to play during the hours of 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. The first game had you running around a haunted hotel. You have one goal: escape. During the escape, you would encounter and deal with an assortment of hostile entities along the way. These range from spooking a possessed maid by using the camera's flash on her, lulling a demon baby back to sleep by spinning the music box correctly, and then carefully balancing yourself against the floorboard so the baby won't wake up and kill you, solving a cryptic coded puzzle to escape a room with an unknown individual beside you, strapped up with a straitjacket, browsing through the photos of people and clicking the right picture which leads you to the next room, and running through the hallways while a voice guides you to the exit. In the game, if you entered your phone number, you'd actually get a real-life phone call in the middle of the night that tells you haven't escaped the hotel. In contrast, Asylum 626 is very different from the first game, in that rather than escaping the hotel, you are in an asylum being operated by doctors while bizarre footage plays. One of the interactive aspects of the game involves you dodging the chainsaw of some unknown murderer while hiding in the closet after they killed your parents, looking at the dark waters of the sink, keeping off the entities by using your flashlight, and choosing who to sacrifice. These were pretty cool, mysterious horror games that had absolutely no reason to be as good as they were, especially considering the fact that these games were only created as a Halloween marketing stunt from Doritos to bring back their two dead flavors. Those flavors were black pepper jack and smoking cheddar BBQ. I'm being serious. Doritos, the chip company, is responsible for creating some of the most unique, hauntingly terrifying, internet-centric horror games ever. Kudos to you, Doritos. So what happens if you try to play these games today? Well, unfortunately, since these games were created for marketing purposes, they were never meant to last forever. Around December 2011, these games were nowhere to be found on either website. It's as simple as that, really. Once the trend died down, there was no use keeping the website up. And ever since then, Hotel 626 and Asylum 626 were never to be played again. Currently, the only feasible form of experiencing these games is through gameplay videos on YouTube. So while the games themselves might be lost, at least almost every aspect of this game is preserved in video form here right on this platform.
If you've kept an ear to the survival horror community, you may know of a 1996 PS1 sci-fi horror game entitled Overblood, a game that was quite ahead of its time as the environments are notable for being entirely 3D rendered. What many may not know, however, is that there was a similar game from a different studio that was being developed that same year. The studio in question was called Aramat Productions, a small independent developer located near Portland, Oregon. This indie studio was responsible for a brand new survival horror game that coincidentally would have taken place in a sci-fi setting. Dead Unity was a Resident Evil-like survival horror title that was to be published by THQ for the original PlayStation. From what we can gather, the plot of Dead Unity follows an artificially enhanced human in the city of Unity as he attempts to power down the massive computer core of a global mediation machine. Though the title was slated for release in 1998, Dead Unity would sadly be cancelled for unknown reasons. In an attempt to gain information over the game, I researched who worked on the game, and I was able to find at least one of the developers. To my luck, I was briefly able to get into contact with one of the devs on LinkedIn, but unfortunately, after I asked my questions regarding the project, I was ghosted. I tried following up a couple of times, but the dev was either ignorant to my responses or didn't feel comfortable sharing any information regarding the project. Unfortunately for the public, all that RMat devs left was a low-quality pre-rendered trailer as well as various screenshots of the game. As to where the unfinished remnants of the game reside is a mystery, and until more information seeps through, it's likely the story behind Dead Unity will remain a mystery for a very long time.
The final entry on this list harkens back to the Wii yet again, except this time we're discussing a game that had no previously established franchise. Back in March of 2006, a brand new horror game was announced for the new highly anticipated console, which was set to release months later. This new horror game was a peculiar one, set in World War I in Eastern Europe. Sadness would have followed the story of Maria, a Victorian-era aristocrat who has to protect her blind son Alexander after their train derails in the countryside. Based on the Slavic legend, Sadness was promoted as a unique and realistic horror survival game that would surprise players by uniquely focusing on psychological horror containing associations with narcolepsy, nyctophobia, and paranoid schizophrenia. Jesus. The developers Nibris had made a series of promises for this eclectic horror game, one of which promised that the game would have provided extremely innovative gameplay, fully utilizing motion sensing capabilities of both the Wii Remote and the nunchuck. For example, it was suggested that players would use the Wii Remote to wield a torch and to wave it to scare off rats, swinging the controller like a lasso in order to throw a rope over a wall, or picking up the items by reaching out with the Wii Remote and grabbing them. This can all be seen within the concept trailer for the game. Sadness was also planned to have open-ended interactivity between the player and the game's objects, being able to use any available item as a weapon, such as breaking a glass bottle and using the shards as a knife, or breaking the leg off a chair and using it as a club. The game would also have no in-game menus or HUD elements for immersion purposes. While expectations of the game were steadily increasing, a series of accusations would make way for the public to acknowledge the fact that Sadness was hardly in production. These accusations were made due to the lack of gameplay, screenshots, and previews of the game. And as time went on, Sadness became notorious when it was made evident that the game was stuck in development hell. You see, Wii games on average only required about a year of development, and even though Sadness was an ambitious project, as time went on, it was made increasingly clear that the game had no direction or intention of release anytime soon. Nibris became infamous for delaying the game on multiple instances. In one instance, they even just outright missed the deadline with no explanation as to why. Finally, in 2010, the game was cancelled, but that doesn't explain what happened to the game. What was the issue? Why was Sadness never shown? Who was in charge? And what is the status of this game? Well, initially the game was made in partnership with Frontline Studios as well as Digital Amigos. Frontline would have handled the programming and Amigos would have developed the game's visuals. Nibris was in charge of the creative side, heading the story and direction of the game. In May of 2009, N Europe interviewed, I hope I'm saying this right, Adixim Arthur Antlowski. I definitely said that wrong. A former Nibris employee and scriptwriter for Sadness, who revealed that the constant failures to meet deadlines were caused by the prolonged disputes over its design, with little consensus made along the staff and with Frontline. And Tolsky stated that the progress made during the first year included completion of the script, concept design, and only one 3D object, that being just some random minecart. Another twist of the knife was made when Ann Tolsky also went on record stating, Nibris always was better in promoting than making anything. So from the sounds of it, the devs devs at Nibris were in way over their head, and after a series of mismanagements and late deadlines, the game and studio would inevitably shut down. Nibris equates this failure to be a result of not having a publisher, when ultimately a lot of the blame is on the team for not having a clear vision as to what this sadness was supposed to be, and never having anything to show for it. Funnily enough, after the company fizzled out, a large majority of devs at Nibris joined newly found Bloober Team, soon to be known for games such as Layers of Fear and The Medium. Oh yeah, and they're also working on the new Silent Hill 2 remake, so there's that. Alongside the staff, projects were also handed over to Bloober Team, meaning that whatever asserts that were created for Sadness is tucked somewhere within the files of some random computer server in their Polish offices. The soundtrack for this game, however, was released to the public by the game's composer, Arkadiusz Rejkowski. Ultimately, it seems that Sadness was yet another overly ambitious Wii game, from a studio that had no real idea what they were doing. In premise, the game sounds like a fun interactive experience, but I imagine it would have largely been lumped in with many other shovelware Wii games.
So there you have it, 10 lost horror games you will likely never get the chance to play. Man, there were some really interesting games here. Like, I don't even know where to begin, so I'll just throw it to you. What were some of your 3 favorite games here on this list?
Oof, it's honestly a tough one because I feel like all of them were very interesting in their own way, but if I were to have to narrow it down, I'd say Silent Hill, Cold Heart, of course, because I love Silent Hill. I'll be basic, Resident Evil 3.5, and Asylum 626.
Those are really interesting choices. I also had Silent Hill, Cold Heart on my list as well. I think from a premise standpoint, that game is really, really interesting what they were trying to do with it, where it's rather than like the typical like third person kind of the classic survival horror gameplay style, they were going for something completely different. And the interactivity and the levels of just like personal fear that they were trying to get in there, really, really interesting. But way too overly ambitious for the Wii, it sounded
great. I mean, I don't know if you've ever played Shattered Memories, but on the Wii, comparing it to like the PS2 version, I feel like it does a lot of cool things, especially how you have to like navigate the light with your controller. I think that's like a cool aspect to it. Of course, I mean, there were many cooler aspects that could have been done with what they were able to take out of it. I mean, not amazing, but you know, it's something, I guess.
It's good for what it is.
Yeah.
And it would have been awesome to see what they really wanted to do with it, but it just didn't happen, and it's probably not gonna happen.
Probably not.
So another game you had on your list was Asylum 626. These games are fucking crazy, like
they
really
look
awesome.
Cool. They look crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, Doritos, out of all people, Doritos, like they went over the top to do these 2 games. They look so fun.
Went unnecessarily hard.
They did.
In the advertising, and it was just I kudos to them, honestly, because it's hard to make a good horror game, and it's really hard to make like a free internet centric horror game, not only once but twice. Really just it's really, really awesome.
It's always the games that are like not available anymore to play that are the scariest, it seems. I mean, I don't want to mention like PT because I know that's basic and all, but PT is really scary, and like from the looks of Asylum 626 and Hotel 626, they look scary. Like I feel like I would be scared by them, and it sucks that I'll never be able to play them.
There's definitely is an element of like these lost horror games that makes them like a tinge scarier, because like so a select few people have actually experienced it. And so yeah, I mean, with the Asylum 626 and the Hotel 626, it's like only that group during that specific period of time was able to experience that when it was happening. They got that zeitgeist, which is really, really cool, and that's an awesome story to tell. Unfortunately, I wasn't one of those people, so
I think that kind of adds to the like scary factor of it. Like, oh yeah, I was able to play this game, like it's so scary, and it makes it so like I feel like the hype has gotten even more hype because of that fact alone.
Definitely. definitely. One of my favorite games from the list was Insane, the project with Guillermo del Toro, and I really think that could have been something special if
100%.
if they really stuck to it. You know, we're coming off the back of Volition. They're dying now, like they're dead. They're out of service now, which is unfortunate because that is a season. They are a seasoned developer. It's been around for a really long time, and it really, I would have found it super interesting to see what they would have done with the game. Guillermo del Toro he's a fascinating artist, and the monster designs and the concept art alone is just incredible. And he was trying to make this a 3-part trilogy, which is really interesting too. Super ambitious, kind of like I don't know. Whenever someone mentions a trilogy, like an interactive trilogy like this, I immediately think of Mass Effect, and I'm just like, oh, what if they did like the horror Mass Effect or some way, which I know sounds totally stupid, but it's really cool at the same time. Really disappointed that project never came to fruition. I'm really disappointed he never did anything with any of the monster designs, or just hasn't done anything with the entire IP, the entire idea. And he sees himself as this albatross to gaming, which really sucks, because I feel like if he really just did a game with a studio and with a publisher who actually gave him the proper funds and actually gave him the proper time to do something, he could do it. It's not him. I believe it's just all these corporations fucking with him.
Yeah.
You know, it's Konami, it's THQ. It really sucks.
Something I'd like to add to what you've been saying is that, like, Del Toro, we've seen some of his work, and I feel like we need to see more. Usually it's like collaborative projects. I mean, we've just recently seen Death Stranding and PT and whatnot, and that's just, I feel like, just like a peak, or like just, you know, the tip of the iceberg of what we've really seen from him. I know he recently did a Netflix show called Cabinet of Curiosities, which I personally haven't seen. I'm sure it was good, just because I feel like he's super talented, and you know, he's done a lot of film work that has been good. So to project that onto a trilogy possibly would have been great.
It really could have been a classic in some way. Like, he could have really redefined the entire horror landscape.
I think we need more. We need more of the series aspect to just to beat out Silent Hill and Resident Evil. Don't get me wrong, I love them, but it's always just like that name attached to, you know, whatever, and I feel like we need something new, you know? It's
a little vanilla, definitely. Yeah. Especially considering how long Silent Hill's been out and it's still talked about. I mean, Silent Hill's been like out of the public eye for so long, and it's still being talked about. It's just because, they're the vanilla, like, quintessential horror games, which there's no problem with that. They're fucking amazing, but
I wouldn't even mind like a Dead Space. I mean, I know they're making Alan Wake 2, which is also pretty
I have really high hopes for that game. I think that game can totally fucking sell. I think it totally has the potential to do something really great and become a new, maybe potential survival horror classic in a way. We just have to wait and see, though. We're on the precipice of its release.
No physical release is kind of hurting me, though.
It kind of does suck, yeah. It definitely does, but
I know.
It's the future. It's the future. What was another game you had on your list that really stood out to you?
Well, not to be basic, guys, but if you know, I do like a little series that I've been talking about called Resident Evil. And, you know, we were talking about some of the unfinished projects that never, you know, came about. And Resident Evil 3.5 kind of, you know, sticked out to me. And the reason why I say that is just because there were so many ideas and like ways that that game could have went, and it sucks that we never got to see that as a Resident Evil title. I know that, you know, it did expand to other titles like Devil May Cry, Haunting Ground, but I would have loved to see Leon in that castle and whatnot, and hearing the old sound effects and just, I don't know, everything about it I would have been cool, you know, but action, so
there's definitely like when you look back at those videos, you can still see the survival horror roots in those videos. And it's like, it's not only third person, but they do the classic Resident Evil like static cameras in the room as well, on top of this general air where it's scary. And don't get me wrong, Resident Evil 4 is still scary in some parts, but it's not Resident Evil 2. It's not Resident Evil 1 in terms of like actual horror, which is totally fine. It's totally fine. I mean, you need to evolve the series, and that's just the way the series evolved, and Resident Evil 4 is fucking amazing. So it is unfortunate to see that those ideas kind of just like gone, like
I
a
mean,
fart in the wind.
Even
It's
the third person aspect, if they moved on to that and then like stayed with that survival horror, that could have been
Definitely.
something. Just the third person alone changes everything about Resident
it definitely
Evil.
it's basically Resident Evil 2 and 3 remake at that point, where it's
Yeah.
like they retained the simple survival horror gameplay, but just shifted it to a third person view, and the shooting's awesome.
It works.
It totally works, and that is, for me personally, that's the quintessential Resident Evil experience right there.
I agree.
Is that remake format. So moving on, I have my final game here is that Russian retro sci-fi horror project from Masahiro Ito. The art that he made for that is really, really cool. It's really striking, depressing, dark, this BioShock like just horror kind of. And it's what's most disappointing about it is the era that it was supposed to be made in, because I really felt like this, along with Insane, really could have been made in that PS3, Xbox 360 era where horror was kind of needed most, where it was tossed to the wayside. And this game was hardly in production, so I'm not saying that it definitely was going to be the savior of horror during that time, but it could have been. It could have been really striking. It could have been really scary. It could have been really it could have been a lot of things. Yeah. And it's a shame that that partnership didn't work out, because Sony at that time was awesome. They really were great. And Masahiro Ito, he hasn't really done anything outside of Silent Hill 2 in a really long time. Not anything on par with his prior work on Silent Hill, I should say. And that's a little disappointing.
I agree.
Yeah, so what else about this game really sticks, well, this fake game that doesn't exist anymore, what about it really sticks out to you?
You know, back onto your point, it's really sad that there weren't that many standouts in the PS3 era. I feel like anytime I think of horror games, it's really PS2 that cemented everything and kind of just stayed there. PS3 games are very janky, so a lot of PS3 horror games do not get the best representation at all. I mean, the first thing that people think of when they think of horror games on PS3 is Silent Hill Downpour, Silent Hill Homecoming. I mean, they have Saw games. I know Deadly Premonition is on the PS3.
Resident Evil 5.
Resident Evil 5. And yes, I mean, some of those games are classics, you could say. Like, I would say, like, maybe Deadly Premonition. But they're not horror. They're not what we got at all. They're just, you know, fun, silly games. You know, don't get me wrong, I love games like Lollipop Chainsaw, but that's not really a horror game. It's just like a, you know, fun, like, horror action game. Like, everything was action packed in some type of way. There's no real horror game.
It had a real, like, slasher flick kind of feel to everything. And it's the fun, but not what we wanted. But it's, I mean, thank God things turn out the way they did, because right now horror is thriving in a way. And it's kind of just, it was like the dark period. There were some standout gems though, like Dead Space really was able to become what it was to become, because no one else was really competing with it like that. And even Dead Space fell into that trap where it was like, okay, we're going to shift to the more action focused, cool sci-fi zaniness of this. And it's like, this isn't what we want, dude. So now that we got that out of the way, I challenge you. What is one game you felt would have just, even if it came out, would have totally just not made it?
So I'm gonna have to go with Legions of Fear. That game, it looked very silly. I mean, the first thing I thought of was Siren, especially like the faces and how everything went in that case. I don't know why, but it gave me an Alone in the Dark type of vibe. It didn't feel like a horror, but more of like a mystery-esque type of game.
Yeah.
The gameplay looked super clunky, and I understand like what they were trying to go for in terms of, you know, making it like an interactive type of thing, but it didn't look interesting at all. If the settings and ambience were a little bit scarier, I feel like that could have maybe saved it, but I don't know, it just didn't pique my interest.
Yeah, because like the settings, like specifically when I think of that game, I think of that like grassy field that was like shown in like that one image.
And the skeletons.
Like, the skeletons, and it's like, this is cool, but like I don't know. It's just, yeah, that project was kind of doomed from the start. I feel like it would have totally flopped and would have totally fell into that PS2 obscurity, and it just like that would have been a game people would have been like, you won top 10 horror games you never played. And it's
unless the story was like phenomenal or something.
Maybe it was. Maybe this was the best story to ever be told in gaming. And it just got canceled.
Yeah. Oh, I guess we'll never know.
Could have been. For my pick is Sadness, and I know I might get a little heat for this because I know this game is very, like, a lot of people in the lost horror media space really think that this game could have been something. I felt like this game was doomed from the start. The developers had no idea what they were doing at the start. There was no production made for this game. The ideas sounded super overly ambitious, and they constantly lied in a sense where they were like, we were working on the game, no, we're working on the game, no, we're working on, no, you weren't working on shit. Like, nothing was being made for this game. So I felt like if this game actually came out, it would have been this totally overhyped, underwhelming Wii release that just wouldn't have been worth it in the end, because this project, it sounds cool in premise, and it's probably something you could do now. It's probably something you can do now, an attempt to make now, but not then. And
maybe like a VR type of game.
That's exactly what I was thinking. It was if they tried to make this game in VR today, it could be done. I sincerely believe that.
100%.
But
it would be cool.
There's
just, you know.
We just figured out really cool rope physics in The Last of Us 2.
Yeah.
Like, we just found that out. There's no way you're gonna pick up a fucking rope on the ground, lasso it over like a gargoyle, and then swing over. Like, there was no way you were going to be doing that on a Wii game. It's unfortunate. I really like the idea, but that game would have totally biffed it. And hey, look at the talent that was working on it. People that are currently in Bloober Team, that were picked up by Bloober Team. And I'm not saying Bloober Team is this worst.
Scary.
This awful scary team. I'm just saying they're not as good as they could be, and that's a shame.
I guess we'll find out though. Let's not say anything now. I know this video can be watched at any time, and you know, I'm sure this video, some people might be watching it like after Silent Hill 2 release, but let's pray that, you know, they can do something and maybe prove us wrong. Let's hope so. Yeah, I'm not going into that, you know, no expectations, just waiting. Because
like, we already were met with 2 phenomenal remakes of 2 survival horror classics, that with Resident Evil 4 remake and Dead Space remake, and both of them totally nailed it, totally hit the bullseye. Incredible. This game has a lot to live up to, not only just to the standards of Silent Hill 2, but to the standards of modern survival horror remakes.
It has to do a lot. Like, it
does have to do a lot.
People might love it regardless. I mean, you know, it could be good in its own way, but it's not just any survival horror game. Like,
it's Silent Hill 2.
Exactly. So it's a lot.
Godspeed to you, Bluebird Team. If
we keep on talking, I feel like we're gonna derive from the lost media and start getting into new media, and I don't think that's for this video. So yeah, we'll keep it there.
We'll keep it there. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for watching. Obviously, you know, like, subscribe, do all that bullshit. Blah 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 blah. All right, peace out.
See ya. So there you have it, 10 lost games you will never likely have the chance to play.
What were some of your favorites? Do you think any of these games have a chance to return?
Let us know in the comments. Also, if you or someone you know has any information regarding the missing games present,
please reach out. Media is a valuable source of information, and it will be a shame to keep these games lost.
Once again, thank you for watching.
We'll catch you all next time.
Take care.